To talk to you today. As Stacy said, I do teach online and hybrid, and I think this will be my last semester teaching face-to-face. Just doesn't work in with my style so much anymore. But today, like she said, I'm going to talk about student engagement. And student engagement, there's really nothing new with student engagement. But what's new is our changing times that we are in today. 21st century, all of these technology skills that we're learning to not just to be able to teach with, but to exist in today's world. So today's presentation, I want to try to engage you, my audience, and I want to use some of the technologies that I actually use with my students when I engage them in my classroom. So it's more than just to talk about student engagement. I'm also going to be demonstrating some of these technologies. So to get us started, I think I need to warm up a little bit. I created a video to introduce myself. And it's one of the tools that I use with my students at the beginning of the semester to help them introduce themselves. So let me get this going here. So that's an example of a video that I made for my students as an introduction. I have all of my students do the same thing. And the reason why I do that is I want for them to get to know each other. In a regular face-to-face class, our students are able to sit down next to each other and start talking. They see the faces. They know who the other students are in the classroom. But in online and hybrid classes, we don't always have that opportunity. And what I've learned is that students really like this activity that I give them to do. And it's funny because I use mine as an example. It's a little bit longer, and theirs only has to be 30 seconds. And the limit is 30 seconds is because Animoto only lets you do 30 seconds for free. And it's amazing, students come back and they go, well, that's such a bummer that I only get 30 seconds. I wish I could do more. I mean, how often do you have students asking that, that they can do more? But with my example that I showed them, what do you think they asked me after they watched my video? Any guesses? I can't hear your guesses, but I'll give it away. How did you get that police officer to take a picture with that bear? And if I don't get that one, did you really get a ticket? And yeah, I did. I was driving up this way. So why do we do this? Why is this important? Student engagement is important in what we do as teachers. Or what we as teachers do. But this is what I want to talk about, because it is important. And if we're not thinking about it, we just assume that we're doing it, bad things happen. Or not necessarily bad things, but we don't get the intended result. People ask me all the time. I want to read to you what Ceci says about student engagement. They say students learn more when they are actively involved in their education and have opportunities to think about and apply what they are learning in different settings. Through collaborating with others to solve problems or master challenging content, students develop valuable skills that prepare them to deal with the kinds of situations and problems they will encounter in the workplace, the community, and their personal lives. So I think, as educators, we all want for our students to learn. So it should be a goal of all of ours to find a better way to engage students in the learning process. Sometimes it's difficult with students. They come with different backgrounds. They're busy. They're just not interested in this whole connecting community atmosphere that we're trying to create for them, because we know that it helps them do better. So one of the things that I think helps students to do better in college is that they feel connected to a campus. So it's not just a matter of faculty making students feel connected with student-student connection, but students and faculty connection, but it's a whole college-wide endeavor where staff are involved, the people. One of the things that when I was at South Mountain Community College, is a smaller campus, sort of like here. I'm not sure how many faculty you have here, but we had about 50, 65, I think we had on our campus. So it's small. Is that about your size too? Yeah, smaller. Okay. And what we sort of prided ourselves in there was that we had a better connection with our students. And you can ask any student on our campus, have you ever considered dropping out? And a lot of students will say, oh yes. And then, well, what was the reason why you didn't drop out? And most of the time, they would list a person on that campus, whether it be a teacher, a staff person that helped them in financial aid, all the way down to the janitor that gave them directions on day one when they didn't know where to go for their first class. So people ask me all the time, how did I get involved with all of this technology stuff? Because when I first started teaching, I wasn't thinking about student engagement. I was thinking about, ooh, they just hired me to do this. I better do a good job, and they might change their mind. So why did I get involved? Well, to be honest, I was bored. And when I looked out at my classroom, they looked like that. They were bored too. I didn't have a lot of student-student interaction. There was very little active learning going on. And the reason why was because at that time, I really felt like my students weren't doing enough outside of class to be prepared to do well inside of class. Do you guys find that happening to you? You give them a chapter to read and they come back and you say, let's talk about that chapter, and you get blank stares. They didn't read the chapter. So what that did for me for teaching, is I was a young teacher at that time, I felt like, oh, I need to do more in class. And as a result, it happens then, right? You become the center of attention and you lecture all the time. You didn't read, so I need to tell you all this stuff. And after 2 or 3 years, I was bored, and so were they. So at that same time, the college that I was teaching at, Central Arizona College, was starting to hand out computers for all the faculty. So we had these computers in our offices. It's kind of weird to think back about teaching and not having a computer, but I'm sure most of you have experienced that. I know if I have, most of you have too. But anyway, so that was about the time where we were introduced to technology, and I thought, hey, maybe if I started playing around with all of this technology, I could probably use it to my advantage. Okay, so one of the things that I want to talk about today is SESI. And there's some interesting data that comes out of the SESI survey. And basically, it's a survey that was put together by the Community College Leadership Program out of the University of Austin, or University of Texas at Austin. And back in 2001, they decided that they would put together this survey to survey students on student engagement. They work in conjunction with NESI, which is the National Survey of Student Assessment. But basically, they just wanted to be able to provide data so that the institutions can decide for themselves if their college is doing a good job. So SESI defines student engagement as the amount of time and energy students invest in meaningful and educational practices. What's interesting about SESI is that they believe that student engagement is a measurement of institutional quality. So if you can prove that your college does a good job with student engagement, then they would say your college is a good institution. Your vice president or vice provost was just talking about your accreditation process, when we went through the accreditation process, we used the SESI survey to help us get through that process and prove that we were a good serving institution for our students. But what I want to do today is share some of the data, because even though, as it appears, when I looked on the website, it didn't look like Yavapai was a member. Does anyone know if you're a member of the SESI survey?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay, because you're thinking about it, it's great. I didn't see that you were a member, but it's also good to just look at the national trends that come out of that survey. Another thing that's good is to find institutions that are involved in the survey, and you can sort of compare their data with what your data. So you might find another college that, I don't know, is Yavapai considered rural anymore? I mean, is it still? So you can find a similar college and see what their data says. So in Maricopa, we don't have all of our colleges that participate, but a lot of them do. But it's fun to look at Mesa, which is our largest campus. We have about 28,000 students. That's huge. We'd like to look at their data and see what's going on with them. But there's a lot that we can learn about the student engagement data that comes out of SESI. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of stats, but I just wanted to sort of set the stage that this is very important enough that a national organization has set up a survey that's a major survey that many community colleges and universities participate in. But anyway, each year they produce a summary report, and they just offer the data about the quality of community college students' educational experiences, and then they describe how colleges across the country are intentionally making connections with students online, in the classroom, and on campus. So it's really not just about what we can do in our classrooms, but it's really a campus-wide endeavor. So this is one of the quotes that came out of SESI. Personal connections are the unanticipated success factor, a critical variable that improves the odds of persistence. And I want for you to think about that for a second, because most of the time when we are in our classrooms, we're really concerned. I teach English composition, and I'm really concerned about, can they write when they leave? And I need to make sure that I teach those skills. And sometimes we forget that it might just take a personal connection to get that student to persist and to try a little harder. It doesn't have to be necessarily me, but sometimes when you put students together in groups, that personal connection can happen. Or if you suggest that a student go see a tutor, that connection happens. So, these are the 5 benchmarks of effective educational practice. These are the benchmarks that the survey covers. Active and collaborative learning, and that's the one I want to talk about today. But they also survey on academic challenge, student effort, student-faculty interaction, and support for learners. So these are all the areas that if you were to participate in the survey, they would be asking questions of your students to see how well you rank in these areas. So let's talk about active and collaborative learning. These are just a few of the key results. And these are interesting. 64% of respondents reported that they asked questions in class or contributed to the class discussions either often or very often. So we can look at that and say 64%, that's pretty good. If you get 64% of the people that can ask a question in class or even participate in a discussion. But is that really good? I mean, if you think about it, if you really want to engage all of your students, should they be able to walk out of your classroom without ever participating in a discussion? No, but that happens, and a lot of times it's not really our fault. We get 50 minutes, you have 24, 30, I don't know what your cap is, but 24, 30 students, and if you wanted them all to participate in a discussion, you'd have to go say, go. And then the student starts talking, and as soon as they get to 5 or 10 seconds, okay, you're done, next. Oh, you didn't speak quick enough, next, and you would never be able to do it in that time. So it's not just that students aren't participating, it's not just that we're not trying. Sometimes we just can't do it because of the time restraints. Another stat, this leaves 36% who haven't engaged. When I think of 36% of students in my classes that aren't engaged in a classroom discussion, I think that's wrong, that's bad. Now, here's another one for in class. Fewer than half, 47%, often or very often, work with other students on projects during class. So that goes back to my example where I was talking about where I felt like because they weren't reading, they weren't coming prepared, I was presenting more content in class and less time spent on projects. So students aren't doing any active learning activities in class. If there are other types of activities, but in this instance, they were participating in projects. Now that still leaves 40% in there that may have done it a little bit, but look at the 13%. Never. Never. I think that these are the national averages. I think that we can do better with that. And because of the way our times are changing and the use of all of this technology that we have available to us, we can make this better. Now, those stats were all about what happens inside a class. Are you a little curious about what happens with student engagement outside of class once they leave? I already admitted that my students weren't reading when they left. What else was I giving them to do to engage with my content that they were or were not doing? Let's look at this. I have this question. What percentage do you think worked with classmates outside of class to prepare class assignments? So basically, to work with others to do their homework. So let's get out. You have cell phones with you? Let's vote. Let's see if this works. So this is called Poll Everywhere. My students love this. And to participate, there's a number if you can see it. It's the no, you can't see it up here. It's the 99503 number. Do you guys know how to text? I actually had to teach my students how to text. And yeah, that's what I thought. But they didn't know how to type in the number first. So the number that you're going to actually call or text to is 99503. And then what's your choice? If you think it's 10% of students that they work with classmates outside of class, so instead of just doing their homework all by themselves, did they get any help? 10%, 22%, 50%, 71%. Oh, 10%. Okay, not bad. Okay, anybody else? So while you're voting, I'm going to show you some more stats, and then we'll come back and see if you're in agreement with the national average. Okay, here's some more key results while you're still texting. Did you remember the number that you wanted? Okay, a small percentage. These are activities from outside of the class. A small percentage, 8%, have tutored or taught other students often or very often. So that would be a way for students to be engaged in your course content, is to actually tutor. Well, even though you can get paid for that, very few students do that. And I think a lot of it has to do with they don't feel like they are smart enough to be able to teach other people, and then they're often amazed that they do know enough to be able to help other people. Or they're amazed that someone knows less than they do. So only 8% do that. But 23%, which is another low number, have at least occasionally participated in a community-based project. So 23%, so those would be your projects like maybe your service learning projects. You might have students go out and help at a food bank and then write an essay about it or things like that, you get them involved. Lots of different activities that you can assign for your students, but only 23% have at least occasionally participated in a community-based project. That's very few. So there's an area right there that we can improve on. And then half of the respondents, 50%, often or very often discussed ideas. Now I think that's odd because the way that I live my life today, I'm sure that I'll leave here today and I'll go back down to the Valley of the Sun, which I hope will be warm. And I will probably discuss with whoever will listen all of the great things that I'm going to learn today from you all. And it's just such a natural process for us to do that as educators. But our students don't do that. It seems odd that we could spend a whole class talking about something that's really interesting, and when they leave, only half of them are going to bother to talk about it with other students, their family, their coworkers. I have an 18-year-old senior that lives in our house. He's actually a pretty good kid, but so the conversation goes, so, not literally how was school today, but basically how was school today? What did you do? You know what he says? Nothing. It was all right. It was okay. Why wouldn't they want to discuss all the cool things that they're learning from us? I don't know. So let's go back. Looking at these stats, they're pretty low. So do you think they're doing their homework alone, or are they getting help? Well, you all think that 10% are doing it, and one lucky winner thinks that 22% of students on national average are getting help with other students outside of class. So it's kind of interesting that students and faculty aren't doing more to engage our students. And there are varying reasons, but I want to read this quote for you. It says, student engagement occurs when students make a psychological investment in learning. They try hard to learn what school offers. They take pride, not simply in learning the formal indicators of success. Did I get an A? But in understanding the material and incorporating or internalizing it in their lives. And what's interesting is I like to use Poll Everywhere. That's the tool that I was just using with you, and you all texted your answers in to me. And an example of what this quote says happened one day. I gave a poll everywhere, and they all participated. They thought it was the coolest thing once they figured out how to use it. And then about 2 weeks later, I can't remember exactly what the conversation was, but I had made a decision about a quiz. And I think that it was a hybrid class, and sometimes they have their quizzes in class, which are proctored, so they can't cheat. And then other times they can take their quiz outside of class, and they're instructed not to cheat, but I'm sure they all do because the scores are higher. And I made a decision to make the next quiz proctored in class. And a student raised his hand, well, they don't raise their hands. He spoke out and said, well, I think you should do a poll everywhere, let us decide on that. So the student is already thinking, here's a tool that I used in class to engage them in what we were talking about earlier in the semester. And then later in the semester, he's remembering that and wanting to, implement it again. To his favor, of course, because I would have lost that poll, but I said no. Well, obviously from the SESI survey, there was only 1 of 5 benchmarks that we looked at, but we know that active and collaborative learning is a good way to engage our students. Getting them to do stuff, whether it be in class or outside of class, and I think some of the difficulty for a lot of us is, well, what can we do? How do I do this? And we also have to keep in mind that what worked when I first started teaching, I've been teaching for 20 years, what worked 20 years ago is not necessarily going to work today. And I say all the time that our students are different, and I get replies, well, not all of our students are these millennials. It makes it sound like a bug or something, the millennials. Not all of our students are like that. We have older students that come back, and they didn't grow up using technology. But if we think about why a lot of our older students, reentry students, come back, it's because a lot of them are displaced in the workforce and they want to get new skills. Well, what are the skills that some of these businesses and companies are looking for? They're going to hire someone who has these new technological skills a lot of times over someone who doesn't. So we have to look at the way that we do things differently and not just say, we don't, or I don't. Okay. Also, making the connections. That's one other way. That's the one thing that we overlook a lot, is that these connections are very important. I think back with my whole college career, and I think part of the reason why I did well is because I was self-driven, and I knew that if I even thought about dropping out, my mom would probably kill me. But a lot of my success had to do with the fact that I had connections. I was an athlete growing up, so I was involved on athletic teams. I went to Phoenix College, so if you missed class, your coach knew about it, that types of thing. But normal students don't get that, so we can help make connections. But there's also the 7 principles of good practice. Do you guys remember that? 7 principles of good practice? They came out in 1987. And author Chickering and Zelda Gamson published these 7 principles in the American Association for Higher Education Bulletin back in March of 1987. The picture that I have here I want to share with you before we move on is a Wordle. You guys familiar with Wordles? Basically what a Wordle is, you can take a document, let's say an essay. I do this with my students sometimes. I have to take their essay and they put it into this web site called Wordle.net, and what it does is it outputs this picture with all of the words. And the words that are used most frequently in the document stand out. So here you can see that students stands out the most. And what I did was I took the article that Chickering and Gamson wrote in 1987 and I put it in the Wordle, and this is what came out. So their focus is students, learning, and faculty for these 7 principles. But I mention this because the principles were written 22 years ago, and it's interesting how they began the article. This is what he said, or they said. Apathetic students, illiterate graduates, incompetent teaching, impersonal campuses, so rolls the drumfire of criticism of higher education. Have you heard that? Maybe not so much with community colleges today, but I've even been known to call some of my students apathetic, even today. Okay, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as illiterate, but I think that sometimes they're coming with less skills than they had previously. So the point I'm trying to make here is that although this is what was said in 87 and the 7 principles were written in 87, they're still valid today. So I want to share with you just briefly what the 7 principles are and talk about how these 7 principles really relate to what we're talking about today, which is student engagement. I'm going to use another tool, which is VoiceThread. I hope it works. Let's try this button. We'll find our way back, right? Lisa says, we'll find your way back. Okay, so these are the 7 principles, but before I talk about the 7 principles, let me explain to you what this is. This is called VoiceThread, and this is a discussion tool. And what it does is it allows for people to come together and participate in a discussion. So I proposed to my fellow colleagues in the Maricopa Community College District if they could tell me how they were using, if they were using, and how they were using the 7 principles with the help of technology. And I got a few responses. We won't be able to listen to all of them, but we'll listen to a few.
Well, I guess for whatever reason my camera's not working on the Mac. It gave me a lot to think about here, and some things probably to improve upon. So first, encourage contact between students and faculty. I too, like the example you gave, require blogs, but another one I really like is I have my students do introductions with Animoto, and that really gets people talking about and making personal connections, which I think then facilitates stronger communication throughout the semester.
Hey Hope, it's Laura. I'm going to comment on the gives prompt feedback because I don't think I have examples for all 7 of them, or any that I can think of right now off the top of my head. So for prompt feedback in my online English course, I try to have a 2 to 3 day turnaround for their paper, their long paper assignments. I use the track changes feature in Word, so I give them feedback with comment bubbles. And
one thing that we're trying to do is help encourage the students to engage in active learning by understanding the audience. Right now, we just finished up an assignment where they had to review a restaurant or a place of business, and they had to post the review in 2 different places. The review site and the review item, be it a meal or something like that, had to be identical. But because they were posting to different websites, it depends who their audience is.
Hi Alisa, this is Lisa. One of the things that I use is I give prompt feedback. With assignments, I always provide immediate feedback to my students using Microsoft Word track changes and comments, and then I speak to it using Jing, so I make a little video of the feedback. But I'm only giving feedback based on one student's assignments. So another thing that I do is I create an announcement that I post in my course management system that synthesizes all of the assignments.
Between students and faculty. I actually have them on email, but I also got everybody in class on Twitter, which I've infused into that, into the classroom now for 2 semesters in a row. And so that's one way we try to keep up and share links and whatnot. Also, everybody got a WordPress blog.
Okay, so just quickly here, you can see how I was able to engage my audience and get them participating in a discussion. But in the same process, they also gave you some good examples of how they are using these 7 principles, which are to encourage contact between student and faculty. And the example that Shelley gave, and my example in the first, I didn't let you listen to mine, was using blogs and then using the comment feature to have a dialogue back and forth with students on their blogs. But also develops reciprocity and cooperation among students, encourages active learning, gives prompt feedback, emphasizes time on task, communicates high expectations, and respects diverse talents and ways of learning. So these are the 7 principles, and there's a lot of different ways. And I'll have a link to this. I'll let Stacy have the PowerPoint presentation, and you can find the link to this and listen to the rest of their comments. But they really give some good ideas of how you can engage your students by using these 7 activities, these 7 principles, excuse me. Also, I just want to point out before we leave VoiceThread, it's another free tool. All the tools that I'm using today are free tools. To get more features, you can always upgrade and pay more. In this case, this is really cool because if a student clicks on the comment button, they're given the option to record video, record audio, phone in using their telephone. So if they don't have a microphone, they can just call in and leave a message, or they can type in. So it's a really cool tool. Okay. Okay, so what I want to talk about now is that we understand student engagement, I think, and we understand its importance, but what we might not understand or what we might not see as something that's simple is, well, how do we engage these students today? Because as we know, today is a new day, and we do get these interesting groups of students. I have a friend who has twins. I think they're 11 now. But it's really interesting because when you walk into their house, the first thing that happens is, ooh, you have to come see my new video. So of course you spend your 5 to 10, 15 minutes with the 11-year-old before you actually get to visit with the adults. But they're very creative. They make these videos and they're doing things that I can't even imagine how they do that. And I find myself, instead of going, ooh, that's cool, like they're used to hearing, I'm going, how'd you do that? How'd you do that? And I want to spend the rest of the time there working with them. But our students are different. I want to show you just a little bit of this video. You may be familiar with it, but it says, have you been paying attention? Because if you haven't been paying attention, you may have missed something. Let me show you what our students are like today. So what do your students create? And it's interesting because when I think back on when I was in college and the way I teach today, I can remember sitting in classrooms. I was an English lit major, so maybe that was just the lay of the land, but I can remember sitting in class for the majority of the time, and it was either lecture or this really awkward discussion where very few students really understood and were brave enough to offer their interpretation of the literature in class. But there really wasn't anything that I was able to create other than, that essay, write that essay. There's so much more that we can do. What I'm talking about here is 21st century literacies. It says, as we move forward into the 21st century, it is up to us to identify the essential elements of current multi-literacies and promote them, to address the special characteristics of each of today's media and technology, and to create the personal and institutional flexibility to change and learn as the world does. So sometimes it can be scary because, well, I don't know how to make that video, so how can I ask my students to make that video? And a lot of times that's a legitimate excuse. But it's more than just that. There are a lot of different opportunities for us to take hold of. Let's talk a little bit more about the 21st century literacies. Are you familiar with them? It says they refer to the skills needed to flourish in today's society in the future. The best way to look at this is the last presidency, or presidential race. What happened? Obama came out and he did something that had never been done before. And because I am in tune with technology, Obama was in my Twitter feed. He's still on my Facebook. It's still weird for me to see him. I know it's not really him, but he's on my Facebook. There are videos, not only videos that he made all over the place about, his politics when he was running, but there was generated videos from other people, from just people in society making videos. Musicians and artists were creating things. He had a brand. Branding is a big thing in the 21st century, where you create this image, and every time you're out there, you see this brand. And Obama did that. And that's what 21st century literacies are. It's the way that you get your message out today changes. So for me, as an English teacher, I had to really start thinking about what I'm teaching. Yes, my competencies still say I need to teach students how to write, and more detail than that, but that's the basic competencies. But then I look at the 21st century literacies and I think, am I doing them justice if I'm only teaching them to write? Are there other skills that I could be teaching these students while they spend time in my class that could better serve them? So the 21st century literacies are information, media, multicultural, and visual literacies. So we're going to use a little visual literacy right now to talk about them. And the first one is information literacy. We have any librarians in the house? So the librarians have this down, at least the ones that I've met. I go to technology conferences every year. I try to go to at least one, and often I'm lucky enough to get enough money to go to two. But I always run into librarians at these technology conferences. And I didn't really understand why until I started thinking about information literacy. And basically, what it is there's tons of knowledge out there, tons of information out there. And a lot of us are even inundated with it. It's just everywhere. If you want to know what something is, you just get online, do a search, and it's there. Our students know that. You ask your students a term, and if they don't know, ask them what they'll do to find out. They'll either look in their book, this is what research shows, they'll either look in their textbook if you have one, or they'll Google it, okay? So Bing kind of throws them off because now they can't say I Googled it when they use Bing, so they Google it. But what they don't know is that once they get all of that information, how do they decide what is the good information, right? They have millions of hits, but they're not good at picking out the good stuff. What do you think they do? They take the first one on the list. So part of information literacy is teaching students not just how to find the information, but how to understand it, how to evaluate it, and how to use it to their advantage. Or not just to their advantage, but in their personal lives, their social lives, their global and professional lives. And I think sometimes we become so narrow in our instruction that we exclude a lot of that. So when I teach students how to write, I let them write in blogs, because blogs can serve more than just a purpose of writing an essay for the next class that they might take. Now they know how to communicate with the world in an effective manner as well. So information literacy is one of the most important skills that I think all of us are really trying to do with our students. But we also have media literacy, and this is the one I think that gets lost. When I tell my fellow English instructors that I allow for my students to do a video instead of write an essay, they're almost appalled. They don't say much because they really don't know exactly what that means, but they think this is a writing class. Why aren't you having them write? Well, I'm going to show you a little bit later an example of a piece of a video essay, that a student did. But media literacy is very important because of the skills that they need to learn how to communicate using this new technology, whether it be video or audio. I just gave you the example of Obama and how he used it to his advantage, but it's also just the changing times of how it's an easier way sometimes for students to communicate in that way. It doesn't mean that they're not writing. For instance, students can still write an outline. They still have to organize their ideas. They still have to have transitions. They still have to have a thesis, a main point. But it's just a better way, in some cases, to present information. We have multicultural literacy. I was just a couple of weeks ago over at the Thunderbird International School of Management down in Phoenix. That's where I met some of your colleagues here. They were doing a demonstration on integrity. But it was really interesting about that college. It kind of helps explain multicultural literacy, is that all of their students, not only are they from all around the world, they all have to learn a foreign language. And as we know, with the way the world is going, we're becoming more global in businesses. You know, a student that might graduate from Yavapai College might end up being a manager at a company that manages people from India or from Africa. You never know today with the way businesses are being run. One of my best friends works for an energy company right here, not right here, but in the valley, Phoenix, actually Chandler, and she is one of 2 females and probably one of 3 Americans that work in that company. Everyone else is foreign. They come from Turkey, from India, and it's just a company in the United States. So we are faced with that more and more each day, that our students are needing to know more about multicultural literacy. So it's not just about the language. So, you know, I have another son who's 20, these are stepsons, 21, he's a senior at ASU, and he took Spanish in high school. We were proud, yay, take Spanish, good. It seems like a good language to learn in Arizona. But he doesn't know Spanish now, and he's a business major. And I think about when he graduates, and depending on where he decides to go to grad school, will his skills compare to those students who graduate from the Thunderbird School, where they not only have learned another language, but they have studied abroad and are more multicultural literate than he may be? He still has a chance, though. Maybe he'll apply at Thunderbird. I don't know how he's going to pay for it, though. Maybe he shouldn't apply. Visual literacy. And the last one, example today, when I started, I gave you an example of visual literacy, a way of communicating. Did you learn anything about me that I didn't say to you today? Probably, just by watching that video that I created. So we can communicate through images, and these images are a new way of language. I mean, those of you that are into, these images are a new language, but those of you that are into art, doesn't art speak to you? Well, we can bring some of that And we have to bring some of that into other disciplines as well, that images can say a lot. You know, when I walked in, I wasn't sure what all of these things were around the room, but it's very clear that image is very important to get the whole message that this display is trying to say. Those images are important as well. Okay, so visual literacy, though, is not just pictures, but it's TVs, movies, and then also all of the different things that happen on the internet, like flash presentations and so forth. So now the question is not just how do we engage students, because we have a good idea with that, but how do we engage these new 21st century learners? Have you heard of Web 2.0? I use another Wordle here for Web 2.0. You put in the definition of Web 2.0, and this is what pops out. We see a lot of Web 2.0 users, content, information, applications, data, web. These are the key elements of Web 2.0. And it's not the only way, but it is a tool that we have available to us that can help us address these 21st century literacies. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Web 2.0 because I saw that there is a presentation later today on Web 2.0, so if you're interested, hopefully you'll attend that. But basically, I gave this quote specifically from 2005 because of what it says. It says, Web 2.0 is the moniker for an emerging set of internet-based tools and emerging philosophy on how to use them. So the key word there was emerging. But that was written 5 years ago. So Web 2.0 really isn't emerging anymore, but yet some of us still have not adopted many of these tools that are available to us. We're missing out on an opportunity. And part of the reason is that we got so much going on that it's difficult to take time to learn something new. We're doing a good job, and we're comfortable with what we're doing. Sometimes, because of the changing times, we might have to change. I put a link here to Cool Cat Teacher. She's a internet guru on the web. She's connected to everything. She has a blog, and on her blog she wrote Basics for Beginners. What is Web 2.0? And one of the key things that she says about Web 2.0 and faculty is that as faculty, when we have students come into our class, they're faced with a new set of vocabulary that they have to learn. You know, they come into my class and I'm teaching them ethos, pathos, and logos, and they're looking at me like, what is that? But I'm expecting that they're going to learn these new terms. And they step up to the challenge because they're in this class, and they do that. But as educators, sometimes we shy away from things like Web 2.0 because we don't know the vocabulary. And we need to step up to the challenge and say, hey, I'm expecting my students to do this, I should do it as well. So I liked her article because it really addresses some things and some fears that a lot of us might have with trying new things. But Web 2.0 is about engagement. It's going from the read-only web to the read-write web. So if you can remember when we first started talking about the internet and using the internet, it was all about going and finding information and reading it. And that was all we did. But now with Web 2.0, it changes it, where we go from broadcasting information to more of a dialogue. So now I can participate. So when I read that journal post or that article, I can now add my own 2 cents. I can even add a picture, add a video. But I can participate in the web. So it's a participatory web, is the way we refer to it as well. Okay, these are the elements, the major elements that are involved with Web 2.0. And you may be familiar with some of them. These are some of the terms. There's not a day that goes by that I don't do a workshop where someone has asked me, what's a blog? Or what's a wiki? Or, what's a mashup? What's RSS? And it's a given that even though it's 5 years in the running for Web 2.0, that there are people that still may not be familiar with things. And that's okay. It's the interest and the want to be able to use some of these things that will help faculty. So social software tools such as blogs, podcasts, and video blogs offer an opportunity for instructors to reach out and engage students in new and personal ways. So what I want to do next is show you some different ways that I use some of these Web 2.0 tools, in addition to the ones that I've already shown you in my classes today. And the first is online discussions. And I think a couple of the faculty here saw a presentation that I did at Sloan where I talked about teaching my classes out of a social network, Ning. And Ning is very familiar or similar to MySpace or Facebook. But I didn't want to have students trying to mix the two. They really didn't want to bring their social life into the school classroom. So I created something completely different using Ning. But here is an example of online class discussion in a social network. And students have a better identity in a discussion using the Ning. What can happen here is they all have their profile pages, so it's not like it's just words written with a name attached to it. There's a picture, and when you click on the picture, it takes you to their page. And if a student wants to make a comment outside of the discussion, they can do that by writing on their page and so forth. But this is interesting because one of the things that I like to do is ask my students about, how are things going? And I don't have time to do that in class if I were teaching a face-to-face class. So I can do this outside of class and ask them what things are working for them, what things maybe aren't working for them. In this particular discussion, they were commenting about the assignments that I gave them. And what's really interesting to me was that I gave them 10 assignments, and it's a research paper writing class. I don't know why I'm so nervous still, sorry. Okay, so it's a research paper writing class, and one of the assignments that they really liked was the assignment that I make them evaluate a website. So they go out, find a website, and then they have to evaluate it to see if it's a useful site. Because I try to scare them, everything on the web is not good, and there are better ways to do research. You can do periodical searches and so forth using the library. And I was really surprised that they liked that assignment. Now, the assignment that they didn't like was the reference source assignment. And the reason why they didn't like it is because they had to actually go to the library. So they didn't like, for one, the fact that they had to leave their houses or leave wherever their comfort was. But they also felt that the materials that they accessed in the library were old and outdated. So they had the luxury of being able to choose topics that were very current. I had 5 students writing on the healthcare reform bill. So, when they went to the library to do their reference, they were just stumped. But part of the assignment was that they needed to talk to a librarian as well. So hopefully the librarian was able to lead them in the right direction. Maybe you could talk about the history of healthcare reform, add that as part of your argument, and so forth. But they didn't like that assignment at all. So I was able to find this out. So when I go back next semester to revise my class, I can take this advice from students and move forward with that. Okay. Another example is podcasting. Stacy mentioned before I began that I was the podcasting specialist in the district. Not so much anymore, but I did start out for about 3 years doing all the workshops for our MCLI, and I would go around to the different campuses. And then we also adopted iTunes U in the district, so each campus, each of the 10 campuses, has a iTunes U site. Now, it hasn't taken off yet, iTunes U, so much, but it's still there, and it's growing on each campus. But here is an example of my iTunes U site for my English 101 class, where I have these tabs for the modules. So we have modules that last about 3 or 4 weeks. And what I'm able to do is put in any key handouts that I want to give students as PDF files. If you can see that far, they're the little darker squares next to the titles. They look like little books. They're closer. And then the other ones look like little TVs because they are videos. And then I could also put audio in there as well. This is an example. There's no audio, just video. So this is the first module. So there's an orientation video. There's a module overview PDF handout. And students can then come in, click one button, and this all downloads to their computer. So it's sort of in addition to accessing the information in Blackboard. I don't use it as a separate a site that's by itself. I use this as, hey, if you use an iPod and you'd like to have your documents all downloaded to your computer in one nice handy spot, you might be interested in, and I teach them about iTunes U. So far, not many students. I'd say probably each semester, probably 2 to 5 students in each class have taken an interest, and that's 2 to 5 out of 48 students, so not many, but it's there. Seems like a lot of work for such little use. Okay, this is an example of social bookmarking. And this is the one where I read a quote earlier that talked about if we want to try to engage students so that they can learn school skills that they can use later in life and so forth. Well, this is one of those assignments that when I first introduce it to them, tell them what they have to do, they all moan and they don't want to do it. And mostly because it's the first part of the semester and they're still learning all their logins for Blackboard, they have to learn their login for Ning, and now I'm going, I'll go to here and get another new login that you have to remember, and they really whine about it. But it's the one assignment that they always come back later and just inadvertently they'll say, well, I was looking at my delicious links and I came across this, or, I don't know, I think I might save that in my delicious. They start using the language and they start using this for not just my class, but their own personal lives as well. And I can tell because they're still in my network, so even though they leave the class, they're still connected. I like to go back and click on students and see if they're actually using it, and a good percentage of them are still using Delicious. But basically what it is students are they join my network, and you can see the list on the far right side of all of my students. I can create network bundles to group them, to keep them separate from everything else. We have a tag. Our whole theme for the course 102 is personal freedoms. So one of the first assignments is for students to get together to come up with different topics that they could possibly research. And they're like, personal freedoms, I don't know what to write about. So the assignment is to go out and find 10 websites that deal with personal freedoms, make sure that they're good websites, and save 10. Only got to save 10. And you tag them personal freedoms. So each student goes out and gets 10. If you have 60 students, I think there were 60 up there, 62, you end up with 620 good websites that they can now look through. So the follow-up assignment to this is that after they've done their 10, then they go in and look at the 600 or so, and they start trying to find topics and talk about what was discovered and would these be good topics. So it's a good place to start. And it also engages students. It engages students in the whole learning process, not just with research, but also with discussion. They can interact with each other, share ideas with each other, all using social bookmarking. Okay, another one is blogs. That's an easy one. Blogs to engage with other students and the instructor. How I use blogs in the research projects, in the research class. Each student has an individual project. They're still following the same timeline and so forth, but they really start branching off in their own direction with their topics, and they move a little bit faster, a little bit slower, and so forth. So what I do is I have them write journals, we call them research prospectuses, and they have to tell me how it's going. So I say, after this last assignment, how's it going now? What's your research question? What are your arguments? How did the research go? Is it working well? I tell them it's their chance to tell me, oh no, it's not working, and then I know that I can go in and do something. So here, I can then comment back. And what happens is the students are never asked to comment on each other's blogs in this particular class, but they always did. So here's some engagement going on between students, some connections, some interaction that I don't even ask for or require that it happens. And this was in the very beginning. This is the very first prospectus. Before I could even get there, someone had come in to this blog and made a comment. And the student had then commented back. And I was like, wow, you guys are fast. I didn't even get a chance to say this is a good topic, and they were already talking about it. So it's working well with the blogs, and once students start to learn these skills, they start using them on their own. Here's a new one for those of you that are already familiar with blogs and social networking and so forth. This is something that I haven't used yet, but I'm thinking about using it in the 101 class when we talk about argument. And students can come to this site. It's called Create Debate. And you can see that you can set up a debate and ask a question. The question here is, should school prayer be allowed in schools? Should school prayer be allowed? I think it should be just prayer be allowed. Anyway, you have the no side, the yes side. Students can come in and post their arguments. And then you can come in as another student and vote their argument up or down. Yes, it was a good argument. No, it wasn't a good argument. And that's where they get those points, 5 points, 9 points, 6 points. And then they can also either dispute or support your argument. So what you can do is encourage students to use sources to dispute or support an argument. And what's really nice is that they have education accounts. You can keep it so that only your students can participate in a discussion, or you can open it up and have anybody participate. And sometimes you get some really good people that will participate in the discussion. Okay, and then one other last example of how you can implement is letting students create videos. And this is an example of a student who created an argumentative essay on gay marriage. And this is just the last minute and a half of her essay.
Well, people still don't like this sometimes because they think kids won't grow up with the same values and ways a child in a street family would. So let's look at what we as Americans define as a family. 2 parents, kids, maybe even a pet. Well, what are gay parents with kids then? Well, there's the 2 parents, there's the kid, oh, there's the pet too. People will argue this too by saying that kids need a male and a female to grow up well, not just males or just female. Well, we don't argue with single parents about that, do we? Children nowadays grow up in many different kinds of homes. Whether they'll grow up to be successful depends on the values they're brought up with and what they learn as they grow up, not who brings them up necessarily. Another reason why people don't like the idea of gay marriages is because they think it's just weird. Now, weird is a word that usually has a negative meaning. So, is it all just weird, or is it just different? Let me give you an example. I might love him, or her, and I might choose to marry one of them. But no matter who I choose, I'm still the same person with the same values. So whether I marry the boy or the girl, I'll still teach my children the best values to be the best person they can be and continue contributing to my society. In our society, we say no to things that are bad and will harm us in some way. Gay people, how are they harming you? Will I be any better or worse of a person if I'm with her? Or him? I'm not harming anyone or anything. I'm still doing my part for society, and who I marry will be who I choose. And I'll still raise my children to be good people. Because in the end, it's all about love.
So that, believe it or not, was a 15-year-old student that I had in one of my summer classes. And a good example of how she wrote an argument. This is one-on-ones. There wasn't a lot of research involved, but she had to do research. She still had to write an outline. She still had to organize her thoughts. They still had to be good arguments in her mind, you know. And I felt like that was as good as an argumentative essay that a student may have written for me and turned in. So giving students an opportunity to learn the skills, so it's not just a matter of, in my course, of being able to write well, but it's also a matter of organizing and doing all the other things that go along with that. So I was really pleased that that student took that challenge, and more are taking that challenge each day. It's still rare, I'd say, of a class, I teach 2 one-on-ones of 48 students, 24. I usually get about 1 or 2 at this point that take that option. And I'm getting closer to the point where I want to require it. So this is my conclusion. It's a blank slide because I never know how I want to end my presentation. And also I had technical difficulties this morning with my computer. But I want to finish up today by just saying that I think that there is a lot of room for us to improve what we're doing. It doesn't have to mean that we're not doing a good job. When I said that the SESI stats said the numbers were low with student engagement, there's a lot of factors involved in that. I mentioned one big one is that we only have 50 minutes 3 times a week, so there's only so much we can do in the class. So obviously those numbers are never going to be 100%. But there are some things that we can do and can improve on and improve our teaching. So whether you want to do it because you want to improve your institution, like SESI believes that student engagement will improve the level of institution, whether you want to do it for that reason or because maybe you're getting a little bored like I was, you can always do a better job just by trying something new. And trying something new doesn't have to mean that it's not good or that it's not worthwhile for your time and your students. So I wish you all the best of luck with your technology endeavors, and if you have any questions, you can follow me on Twitter and ask, or you can email me, and Stacy can provide that information for you. But once again, thanks for having me, and sorry I was a little nervous, but and if you have any questions, I guess we can take a couple of questions. And if you don't, that's fine too.